Hmm.
Hope. Summer morning reels off winnowed sands. There is a mad scramble to identify some pattern in the white clouds. You feel days are drowning in sunlight. Shimul flowers drop unspoken words. Hyacinths and darting fishes fill the ponds. The fire in brick kilns offers the illusion of shapes and plots of glowing twilight. Knights and ghosts are a simple binary in my village. Penciling in car horns for the canvas is only a peer into the fog. Memories imbue the right numbers with a weight that is unable to bear if I go overboard. Childhood still carries that resonance, that vessel of hope. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. From Litinfinite Journal this evening, we have yet another esteemed guest amongst us. We have poet Gopal Lahiri, whom we welcome to our show today. Welcome, Gopalda, to our show from Litinfinite Journal.
Thank you, Sritarni, for inviting me.
Before we move on, about today's esteemed guest, some words. Gopal Lahiri is a bilingual poet, editor, critic, and translator, and published in Bengali and English language. Our esteemed guest has authored 23 books. His poetry is published across various anthologies as well as in eminent journals of India and abroad. His poems are translated in 14 languages, and he is the recipient of Setu Excellence Award 2020. Recent credits include Ink, Sweat and Tears, Captain Mutt Press, Verse Virtual, Borderless Journal, Different Truth, Kitab, Indian Literature, Piker Press, Scarlet Leaf Review, The Daily Sun, Spill Words, International Times, New York Parrot, Tour Valley Review, Indian periodicals, Setu, Muse India, Ink Pantry, and also in a host of other poetry journals and magazines. Today we welcome our esteemed guest, poet Gopal Lahiri, who will be talking to us about his recent poetry publication. Alleys are filled with future alphabets. So we welcome our guest today, and he will be speaking about this book today on our show. Welcome.
Thanks, Sritarni, for your glowing introduction.
Let us first talk about the title of your new book before we move on to all the other things. Tell us something about this particular title. Alleys are filled with future alphabets.
Well, Alizer, we always know that it's in the mind. The book was transferred last year, 2020, uh, during the pandemic time. It's started. I've given this manuscript around September last year, and it took some time and some changes and like that. And the poems, some of the pandemic poems, I have included here also in this collection. But mostly, this is the last 5 to 6 years poems which I have published in various journals. These are all published poems in all over the world. So I have included those poems because 2015 I have my last solo book, Tidal Interlude, collection of poems, and then I have published a few others like haiku and
Hmm.
short poems, and that is also solo book, but that's only in haiku and short poem. There is no other poems as such. And thereafter, I have another book which I have jointly written with Dr. Sunil Sharma. That was city poems, basically. That's with on Mumbai. because you know that I was in Mumbai for some time. So
Yes.
that book was titled Cities to Perspective. That was published, I think, 2017 and onwards. So these two books were there, but this Alleys are filled with future. This is the my comprehensive collection of poems, and you have seen I have mentioned selected poems. So I have in this last 5 6 years, so, whatever I have published. So I have a selection of that, and you know, pandemic, yes, that triggers this to write this book, because at that point of time, everybody, we are all isolated in our house, and it's a very depressing time. So we always, even at that time, we don't feel like writing, but somehow I could manage some strength and started compiling those poems and selecting and like that. And then during September, October time, when the things have slightly improved, I was concentrating and have completed my manuscript, which were earlier written but not strengthened. So I could add some poems there, some pandemic, that is last minute inclusions. In this way, this book has transpired, and I have written this book. And the title of the book, why it is named like that? Actually, I was given the title Failed Alphabets, but future alphabets. But I sent my manuscripts draft to poet Sanjeev Sethi, who is based in Mumbai. He has written on my blog. So he told me that why don't you change the title to the whole line? I mean, allays are filled with future alpha, because you are mentioning allays in many different poems,
Right.
and this will be a very good title, and it will be people will be very much attracted with it. I told that no, no, this is a very big big line. I mean, normally I don't go for so much so lengthy title, but somehow he insists, and I have agreed that it's okay. I will go with that. Then I thought the logic behind it, and why I have put Aliza filled with, because at that time, because it was so depressing, that I thought that maybe future will be, definitely, I'm hopeful of that, everything will be okay. And allays, you know, in the mind we have a lot of, I mean, the bifurcations and like
Absolutely
that.
right.
So those places, like in reality, we have, you must be knowing that there are a lot of allays in Calcutta, of course, you know, there's a lot of allays are there. So as if those places will be filled with alphabets. Why I have written alphabets, future alphabet, which is a positive thing. In that alphabets, you know that language, any poetry is basically, I mean, it's give a place. Poetry is place. We all know that language performs. It's hard to resist from the patterns, from making something that connects and progresses from randomness. So this is what satisfies that language, and some say, some poets says that this is a celebration of language actually in poetry. So fundamentals, alphabets are fundamentals, some elements. So I thought that why not include this title as the poets, the allays are filled with future alphabets. In this way, I have processed and developed the theme, and then finally it was agreed by all.
Yes, because we find that initially there was this, as you told, it was supposed to be a short title, and then how alleys are getting filled. So somehow, when it's about that filling up, or that pandemic stage that you were talking about, when everything was so topsy turvy, still
Yeah.
it is not in that very decent position that we are in. So there is, of course, some kind of uncertainty that is there. So maybe there was
And
this
even it is
futuristic
still there.
perspective also. Yes, it's still there. So future alphabets, they can actually bring that idea of hope and resurrection, maybe.
Yes,
So that
yes,
that emptiness that was there, and that filled up, so that contrast that is there, I think, in that
yes,
name.
yes,
So
yes, yes.
alleys are getting filled with future
Field.
alphabets. Yes, yes.
At least
So
I hope so.
Yes, we all hope so. In fact, in this
Yeah,
dismal times, it is only
yeah,
hope
yeah.
that can sustain. That's true.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
that will again, very interestingly, that brings us to our next. I mean, my reading of the book that I was just going through it. I was having a discussion. While going through this book, I found that there are different segments of the chapter and you talk a lot about the travel, the voyages, the exploits, values, and hyper values, symbol. So voyages in, voyages out, cities in the macrocosm. So how actually, I mean, how do you make this decision? How are
I
these?
think, Sritani, there is some problem with your voice. I can't hear properly, but I could understand what you are telling.
Yes, yes.
Uh,
There is some
and now
problem.
it's, yeah, it was there, but
Uh,
now it is okay. So
yes,
yeah, you told that why
the segments. Yes.
how segments, how you have these actually, voyages out, voyages in. These I have selected this cluster of poems in these segments. These are basically as if, normally it happens that we make a journey towards inside, as if I am visiting myself. So that is voyages in, and I'm visiting outside, voyages out. So in this perspective, I have selected some poems, and these clusters I put it there itself. And cityscape, of course, city poems I love. City, I have already a book on Mumbai, and also recently after this book I have a ebook jointly written by myself and Santosh Bakaya. So
Hmm.
that book is called Princess Ghat to Pir Panjal, but that is a ebook which has also been
So that's a
recently.
huge span, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
You are talking
So
about this Princep Ghat to Peer Panjal.
uh,
That's a huge dimension.
yeah,
That's
and there we have written. I have written only on Kolkata poems, and she has written on Kashmir poems. And
yes,
with the one, of course, I have written another poem exclusive on Kashmir, and she also written on Calcutta. So that's like that. There is some contrast. So these cityscape, actually, there are few poems on cities, not only Calcutta, but in general as a city, as a, I mean, symbol or motif for any country. So that's actually triggered the next book which I have talked to you. And the cityscape, of course, that's belong to city. And I love, I have recently read a book, I think Durrell. He is a British journalist and traveler also. You have seen some of the travel poems are also there here. So he wrote that only the city is real. So that's his impression, that city has given so much impact uh, to everybody, to the poet, to the people. So that gives a lot of impact. So that's why this
absolutely.
cityscape silhouette. And then macrocosm is basically my favorite joint, that is nature. And I love, I am a scientist. You must be knowing that I am scientist in
Yes, right.
background. I'm
And we
basically
find
I
a
was,
fine blend of the scientist and poet in you. So that's
yeah,
a
yeah.
very fine blend.
And especially art science, which I have studied in
Absolutely.
Presidency College, Calcutta, and then I went out of Calcutta. I stayed 30 years outside Calcutta. So those, because in this art science, you have to travel a lot. You have to go to the exposure to see the rocks and minerals and like that. I was in oil company, so there are a lot of other things we have to do it. But everything you have to go outside. I mean, not inside your house. So when you go outside, when you are exposed to the outside world, to the surroundings, you have that feeling that you are very close to the people, to the nature, and not only nature, in the people also. So that gives this macrocosm. And other segments which you have noticed, one is haiku and short poems, another is on pandemic and resilience, and another is travel poetry. So these seven
Right,
segments I put it in this book.
right, right. So, on that note, we would love to hear from you. You reading from your book.
Okay, okay. Any
Yes.
particular segments on whichever I want to? Love to read
No, I
Haiku.
think we can start with the voyages in, no, as
In,
we are
yeah, yeah.
starting. Yes,
Mhm. That is one of my favorite this
yes.
segment. The title of the poem is uh, Departure.
Hmm.
The train is prepared to leave the station. It's just one goodbye away from the platform, littered with departure. The birds are nestled between tweet and silence. Tiny leaves quivering in isolation spin towards a new journey. This evening is a clear image of whispering, yet it is beyond knowing, beyond explanation. I am going to give the stars a call for the undestined travel, a parallel path of lights there fresh from the other world. They carry that beauty, they remember that magic. The air plucks the unspent words of the universe evoke in me. They ring the deepest bell of the truth.
Very
And another
nice.
poem I
Yes.
just uh, very close to this, The Other Eye. I am in search of the other eye, memories swirl unspoken, membranes pierced. Wounds come from the same source. Happiness takes a plunge. Power denies, moves with me like shadow. I can feel but can never touch. The words sink in the quietness. No roles to take, no games to play, colors alluring, strokes of the brush. Lines, pillages, sound muse, whisper dies, shadows lengthen. You are here, but far beyond, real and more real. So this the past.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
And should we continue, or we will ask some question? Then again, we'll come
No,
to
I
poetry.
think I can just frame my question from this only, but I want my audience to listen to one of the other poems from this same segment, if
Okay,
you
okay,
can.
okay, okay,
Yes.
okay, okay. Kolkata, scene one. Kolkata has and will remain a muse. Some days even the white clouds worry me, the way the sky holds them. A rickshaw lives mid-syllable. I am tender with blades of grass near the monument. The molecules are crisp with the arrival of the local train. Breath still unspent, the time has folded them like the blankets. The hair still curled, quivering, swallowed fires, stems of colors in frozen eyes, an etching of Ganesha in wood, the steady curve of the birds in flight, let the corners become centers. The wind learns to lose its way on the pavement. The red bus is just one horn away. The river bridge is rarely corrupted by lies, and there will be no more burning inside. Butterflies in Maidan align with the crease of the petals. Each word stations between hope and surrender.
Absolute delight. It's an absolute delight. Like, I was just going to frame this question only because some questions that come very spontaneously, the difference, these areas, the style with which you are experimenting. Tell us something about that style, the way you are looking at Kolkata voyages in, and then you are looking at the cityscapes. There is a departure, the simple, apparently very trivial. At times, these images, they do find that poetic resonance that is so filled with this passion and ardor of a consummate poet. So, what about this style? Like, how do you experiment? How did you decide about this before writing this particular book, or like it was very spontaneous from all those sources that you gather from outside? Departure, and also Kolkata, and also where you are looking for the other I. Who is the other I? Is it your poetic self, or any other I? Who is the real one? Like, any thought, any style, any experimentation in that?
Well, recently one contemporary poet has written a very one-line poem, very interesting, that poets inhale a city which we can't. So it's like that. I'm inhaling the city, the smell, the surrounds, and poetry is like a mirror. I mean,
Hmm.
whatever, how is your state of mind? What is your ideas? And we all know that ideas, blending of ideas and imagination gives birth to the poetry. So in that way, I have emphasized. Even though some people may feel that it is more of, especially for the city poems or travel poems, or even nature, that I'm digging the surface element,
Hmm.
whatever we are observing, because I'm a scientific background, I have that observation power. I always observe very closely to everything. So that, of course, may be helping me to make the way of my writing maybe aligned to that. And my poetry, I mean, most of the people are telling, poets are telling that it's more of an image based rather than it's
Absolutely
a
correct.
narrative poem. Because nowadays a lot of people are writing narrative poems. They're speaking of something, some issues, some problem or whatever, and those they describe it as in a narrative. So that is there. But my way of looking at poetry is something different. I always look through my images, which I build with maybe simple things, but that I
Yes.
develop in my mind. And um, in Bengali, you must be knowing that অভিজ্ঞতা নির্যাস আর শব্দ প্রকরণ, these two, the
Acha.
experience and the words we are choosing to write something, and nirman and srishti, that you are building up the poem and the
Beautiful.
creativity.
Nirman and
So
Srishti. Beautiful.
those things are very very important for anybody who writes poems. So in that way I go about my poetry, and I try to write and try to connect to my readers. I don't know how far I successful, but I'm always try to connect with my readers. So you know that you must be reading so many poets, and there are few
Yes.
poets who are mainly narrative based. There are some poets who are writing very difficult words also, and those you need a lot of study. I mean, you have to read so many things to understand. Some people have write prefer to write with a lot of, I mean, these. This not example, I mean, depends on so many like myth or history or heritage. They annex this with the poem. So that also another way of writing. But mine is slightly different in the sense that I have already told you. It's like as if I am building an image in whatever sense, whether it is a protest poem or it's a nature poem or it's an poem. It's a poem of on city, or in your, what we are writing is voyages in or voyages out. Your inner voice. So this is the style, you can say. I try to write in this way.
Thank you. This is really inspiring. The way you talked about Nirman and Srishti, the way you talked about this giving birth to the fine strands of poetry. This brings me to my next question,
And
actually. I
you must be
Yes,
remember, just a minute. You must be remembering that
yes,
I'm also writes in Bengali. In fact,
yes,
initially
yes.
I
You
used to be
write
a
in
Bengali
Bengali.
poet.
Yes,
So
in
those
fact,
influences also come. Yeah.
you are one of the finest bilingual writers that we have in terms of poetry. This was not just an introduction, this is for our audience. But today, our esteemed guest, so he is also an expert in Bengali. He is a Bengali poet, he is a Bengali short story writer also. So
I
we
see.
must not forget that. So thank you
Mhm.
for his, we are having multi talented guest, so inspiring. Since you talked about this construction, you talked about poetry, the art of poetry, wings of poesy. That brings me to my next question, and this is especially for you because you are one of the haiku experts that we have. So, From when did you start writing haikus? Since it is a very specialized segment, how did you start experimenting with it? It's actually a very specialized one. We teach as a part of creative writing to our students. Many of our students and audience also they ask. So tell us something about haiku and your practicing.
Yeah, actually, haiku I started writing maybe around 2005, 15 years back. There was a portal at that point of time. There was not much of a portal on poetry, but there was one portal which I forgot the name, maybe Poetry World or something.
Mm-hmm.
There was a segment where exclusive for haiku. So in fact, I started learning haiku at that point of time, maybe 15 years back. And those times, mostly people are writing a very classical type of haiku, like 575 syllables, and basho is everybody has read about translation of that. Even Tagore, you must be knowing that
Right.
Sfulingo, that book is basically a haiku he tried in Bengali. But of course, the syntax and the syllable, that is quite different in Bengali. You cannot match with that Japanese things. And even in English also, because haiku is basically in English, if you spell haiku, this is a two syllable. But in Japanese, it's a three syllable. So syllable counting is also very different in Japanese language than in English. So what happened that with the passage of time, people started writing the modern haiku. I mean, it will be a three-liner, but they are not as they are quite flexible in the sense that it's no longer people are writing in this 575. It is a
Right.
three-liner, and it will be much more condensed. Now people are writing within 13 syllables, or even shorter. And you
Mm.
know, Kala Ramesh, she is from Chennai. I
Yes.
think she is very, I mean, really widely regarded as one of our best haiku writers and exponents. And she has written a lot many things on haiku. And and I was also in touch with many haiku poets at that point of time.
Mhm.
One is Sheshu Chamarti. He is from Hyderabad. So he was there in that particular portal which I'm talking about in 2005. So we used to interact I mean, almost regularly about haiku and
Okay.
haiban and haiga and tanaka. There are so many forms you must be knowing.
Yes.
So gradually we started writing more and more modern haiku. And then nowadays mostly we are writing, we are now no longer, I mean, fixed syllable is there. It's just like the essence, that flash of your observation, because haiku you're not you don't have to read between the lines as such, but the gap, I mean, the space between three lines, those blank space, that is more important, what actually it inspires you. So even recently, I have translated Lorca's haiku. Nobody knows that. Very, I mean, it's not well known that Lorca also written so many haiku. So I have translated, of course, from English to
Is it
Bengali.
going to come up as a new project,
No,
if I may
uh,
ask?
no. It is already. It was published in a Bengali
It was published. Okay,
magazine
okay,
here
okay.
in Totho Kendra. You must be knowing there's a magazine
Right.
from North Bengal, I think. So there I have, it's very good. I mean, I have, I think, selection of 10 haiku, best of this Lorca, and tried to translate in Bengali. It's very difficult to translate haiku in Bengali as such, because every language has its own fixation, own syntax, own way of, I mean, because Bengali and English also totally different. Subject,
Mhm.
object, you must be knowing, no? Those
Right,
things
right.
juxtaposed. So it is a difficult thing, but the essence, basically haiku, what we are highlighting, that essence of anything. Suppose,
Mhm.
and that flash in a haiku, we don't really thinking like normal poetry. We saw something and then we started thinking about that. It lingers in your mind, and then you started writing and wrote certain things. But in haiku, just a momentary impression, and you can write it later, but that moment, that impression is in your mind, and you can write later on, but that
It's a
impression
flash.
is
It's like
transitory.
a
It's a
flash. Yes,
flash,
right, right.
that flash of images. and there is not much you have to read between the lines. Very simple, but it gives some message. And initially, the Japanese haiku, they were of a spiritual and Zen philosophy was there. But now Senru, you're talking that is human elements have come. It's no longer only on nature. So the people are calling it as a Senru. So that is the same like three-liner haiku, but it has some human quirks which we call like human elements. You can say where you can think of haiku. Uh, Mentioning that there may be some conversation with some people, or it takes some messages or something from our life itself rather than it's exclusive on uh, nature. You must have read some of my haiku there,
Yes,
so
yes.
that
That
you
is
can have
why,
a fair idea.
that there is a fine balance that needs to be there. A fine balance that is the need when we go for the syllables, the kind of calculation that is there. At the same time, retaining that poetic essence, that is very
Yes,
important, I think.
that is.
So
In fact, it is
uh,
very difficult.
very difficult
Haiku,
because those who are starting
haiku
and
also,
yes,
yes, haiku also. We take a lot of time to write, or we rewrite, and sometimes we reject because it appears to be very simple. Anybody can line three lines and whatever way.
that
Because
is the
many
thing.
people I have observed, they are written as if it's a diary note. It is not a diary
Hmm.
note. Not like few words. It's not like
Hmm.
that. It has to come out with certain essence, certain meaning, and some impression you have after reading that. So it's not a few words. It's not diary note.
Thank you. We already have our audience who are coming up with their own comments, with their own ideas. They're watching, they're asking. So, we have one question here. I thought of just taking this up from Anju Makhija ma'am. So, she is asking, are your poems like realistic paintings since we talked about symbols, images, and everything? So, what will be your
Yeah,
answer to
people,
this?
yes. Some people tell that you are writing. It's like a painting, but not abstract as such. It is a realistic because painting has a lot of connection with the poems. I mean, poetry and painting and music. This triangle is always there. I mean, connection, as if one overlaps the other. Even you can bring some music in some of one of my. American poet who has written that he finds some musicality in my poems, and some says that it's like a painterly, and that painting is not abstract; it is more of a realistic. But sometimes it happens that surreal images are also there in some of the poems which we have seen, and that also you can say that it has another context. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, on that note, we can go for some more readings instead of just the question answers.
Like,
We would love to hear your poem.
okay. Another question has come. Anyway, I'll
Yes.
reply that later on.
Yes.
Let me read
After the
certain.
reading, yes,
Let's
after the reading.
let's read some haiku. I think that
Yes.
will be because we have
Since we were
discussed.
discussing haiku, absolutely.
Nowadays, even during the pandemic, one of my Canadian poet friends, he has sent me some requests that you write haiku on pandemic theme, and they are calling it as a panku, which is very strange. I have never heard this word, but they are using that, and I have sent some poem haiku, and they have published it.
So it's a
And
new
but all
coinage
those
that
were,
we find. It's a new
but
coinage.
all those are on pandemic. I mean the reaction you're in haiku on pandemic. Well, I'm reading haiku series 2. The mist departs, perfect sunbeams, prattle of bird songs. The mist departs, perfect sunbeams, prattle of bird song. Supermoon eating stars, supermoon eating stars, clear knockout. These are published in a few haiku journal. You must be knowing that there are a lot of journals that are exclusive for haiku like that.
Yes.
Then spotted wings touch noses, flowers blossom. Sparrows at work on the skylight. Laptops sending handshakes from kitchen table. These actually from the pandemic time I written this type of haiku like laptop sending handshakes from kitchen table because we are confined to the house and
Right. That
people are
confined space
cooking and like
that we get.
that. So
Yes,
then
absolutely. And laptops, they became so indispensable as a part of our life. Yes, during the pandemic.
yeah, yeah. Then edges of dawn, goodbyes, litter, sidewalk. This also the pandemic time when a lot of deaths were there and
Hmm.
as if goodbyes, litter, sidewalks. I mean, a lot of people are dying and on the pavement. There are a lot of news have come now that people have died on the road, on the pavement also.
Right.
Then I will go for some one of my travel poem because I
Hmm.
travel. I'm a very restless person because nowadays we can't go many places, no.
Right. In
But
fact, I was just going to talk about this, about your travel. And in this book only, before the show, as we were discussing, this entire journey that is there, alleys are filled with future
yeah,
alphabets.
yeah,
I
yeah,
would, for our audience, I will just show this book once more, the
yeah, yeah,
recent publication
yeah,
that
yeah.
we
I
have,
was.
the recent publication that we have from our esteemed poet Gopal Lahiri. So if you can grab a copy of your own, you can do that. Okay.
It's
So
available in Amazon.
it's available on Amazon. If you search, you can get a copy. So
Yeah,
this was actually going to be my next question also. Like,
I see.
you have been a soulful traveler, so physically and through the poems also. So how did these travels enrich you as a poet? And like, we get these representations in your poems also. So you can read the poems first, and then we can go for this travel
Yeah,
discussion.
yeah, yeah. Travel. I have a few long poems which I am not going to read. I'll be reading very smaller ones so that you can have a. There is a place called Hikkadua that is in
Hmm.
Sri Lanka. We were there, I think, a few years back. This beautiful beach is there on Indian Ocean. Uh, so the Hikkadua is a very popular beach resort area, and you can see a lot of coconut trees there. And it's excellent and white sand that
Hmm.
is very common there. Hikkadua. Strong surf and beaches, palm-dotted skyline, coral sanctuary, and marine turtles. These are all there. I mean, very
Hmm.
rare turtles and coral is there also. Each is a dash of color, beauty, and healer, a layer beneath a layer of desire. Crystal blue waters populates mystery text and texture of the magical under-ocean shipwreck. Overhead the flight of birds creates an ardent flutter. Winds carry new paths around words and signals. The humming quiet of the evening weaves text. Wet sand preserve the typeface of the footprints. Buddhist temple bells with hand-painted murals summon echoes, resonance dance with meaning. On the roadside shacks a silver of dislodged faces, injustice and inequality at every turn. So these poem you can very well understand that there is a lot of contrast there. Even though you have the beauty of the sea
Hmm.
beach and the nature, and that place is known for. You can go this submarine voyage and you can see the shipwreck. There are a lot of ships were drowned there, and you
Mm.
can go there. I mean, a sea walk, which they call. You have that all the dresses, and you go under the water, and you can see the shipwreck, and you can visit those places. They're very tough things, which I have not experienced, but many people have gone there under the sea. Those know very well about the places, the adventure people. And the other side there is a shack. I mean, it was poor people were there. They're walking on the beach, and uh, you can feel this injustice and inequality everywhere at every turn. So that contrast, which I felt, and I was moved that even though so much of beauty and so much of, I mean, you have when you went there as unwinding yourself, and then you find this type
Right.
of visuals, which actually it disturbing.
The,
But
the the extreme sides, the extreme
extreme
points of
sides,
contrast
yeah,
that
yeah.
is there. Yes.
So my travel series, not only it's about the places and the people and like that, but sometimes yes, contrast also it affects you. And there is another beautiful Mount Agung that is in Bali, Indonesia. Recently, it
Mm.
has been erupted. But when we went there, we were standing slightly far away from the active volcano. But you
Mm.
can go down there, which we went down because at that point of time it was dormant. It was not active. That volcano. I think it was dormant for quite some years. And very recently, because we went there around maybe 15, no, 20 years, around 20 years back, 2001, I think. So, but very recently, I think last year, it's that volcano, dormant volcano, became active. So it's called Mount Agung. Everything around me was painterly. The brush stroke looked just real, with colors alluring. The narrow lake was lined with centuries old volcanics, pitched at a plume that's not deafening. I felt its warmth of fire. You feel the warmth there. Even though it's a faraway place, but you feel that you are warming up. And there is a lake, always volcanic caldera, we call, that is always
Yes.
there alongside the volcano. The sky was rebuilt with constellation, the lingering gaze at the shallows of water I had never seen before. The moon would also then go to sleep, only lit up the unresolved feelings of the present that linked me body to body, crossing more planes, more time zones. The galaxies reveal that truth, that hollow immensity. The sky was full of bliss, spilling beyond the mountain slopes, a new revival, a new reinforcement. How then would come sleep in silence, staring past the jittery surface, the starry night danced my sorrows away, leaving me alone on the lacustrine bed. These lakes we call the rocks there as lacustrine deposits, like
Mm.
that. So as if there is a bed is there, you are there only alone. So I went in the evening time. So there was a lot of hotels were there. That is on the
Yes.
hillside, and people there is a lot of viewpoint, and people watch even in the night itself. Because even though it's a dormant, but you can see some flames are coming always,
Yes.
as if something is burning there.
So it's like the globe-trotting experience that is coming to the fore on the pages of what you write. So the poems that are created constantly. And in this book also, Alleys are filled with future alphabets. We find there is this constant journey that will actually bring me to my next question, which I was going to ask, because while we started, we were discussing about the pandemic time and how new lines were written, new lines created, new lines edited. So the pandemic has also taught us not just to remain confined, but it is also about that resilience that we find in poetry. So what's the difference that you found? You talked about travel, voyages, excursions into different tallies, and then it was then about that fluidity that we find in poetry. But after a certain time, when it's about the time of the pandemic, it's more about that strange confinement, the world that is within, and the world that is to be discovered without, that is less. So how did you cope as a poet, or the angst of a poet, if I say like that? So what about that resilience? How can you see that in poetry, or how did you feel like the pandemic had some role to play?
Well, initially when pandemic started, we were totally, I mean, you can say very much unsettled. I mean, very much disturbed. And we thought that this will not end at all. So what will happen to these people? But nature, that is the only contrast we are seeing, that nature is flourishing because there is a lockdown, people are not going out, there is no traffic, there's no very little pollution, and you can see a lot of birds and bees. That is the positive thing which encourage, especially to me, because I love nature. So even if you're confined to the house, you can go to the your balcony or to the window, to the
Mm,
grill. You can see a lot of birds which we have not seen for many years. They started coming, and as if the nature and all those plants and animals, they were, I mean, they are coming as if there's a second birth. So in that point of view, yes, it is. We were feeling very much happy, but the contrast is that we are losing so many people. I have lost a lot of my relative friends there. So and many deaths are very untimely. I mean, all deaths we
absolutely.
feel that it is untimely, but there are many young people died, and so many old, young, and we have some connection in US also, because my daughter was there, so we always is still there. But at that point in time, especially she was in very close to New Jersey, too close to New York, and New York. We are hearing so many horrendous stories of New York and New Jersey. So that gives a really tough time to write something. And then I thought that when we go to the nature and see the animal world or the avian scenario is so good, you always feel that no, certain positive things will definitely come. So that actually triggered this many of my poems, but that particular poems, Alice are filled with future alphabet. The title of the poem is "New World in the Waiting." I
Yes.
just read that poem.
Yes.
Each night is mundane and lonely. Night birds spread their wings. The moment I am looking for is buried beneath the black soil. Each wound I polish on the sacred stone shines in false light. There is nostalgia also. When the lizards cry, the moon goes behind swelling clouds. There is a thick silence you can lean against. The city is laconic the way it was centuries ago. The broken walls scribble. Alleys are filled with future alphabets. A certain beauty is waiting on the street with something that cares, that cultivates.
This is really wonderful, the way you are blending the new world and the concept of I. And I'm especially interested in the way that you have talked about this new epoch, new normal and I, the sequential pattern. If we see from the book, new normal and I, after that there is numbness, after that there is dreams.
Yeah,
So there is
absolutely.
hope in spite of everything, in spite of the benumbing sense that we have, in spite of the dreadful pandemic that we have. We still, we in your poem, we still find that ray of hope in spite of all those blatant lies around us, death and discord and everything topsy turvy. We still find that there is some ray of hope for us. So this is especially my request. If you can just read one more poem from this particular section about dreams, because this is for our audience.
There is a poem is titled Dreams.
Yes.
If I could, I would draw the smiles on wings spread. The evening is casting quivering shadows on the clinic wall. We are all perhaps going to die. The wind is still. The stars pledge to be reborn. Only a half moon waiting for its unsuspecting prey remains suspended in mid sky. What comes next is darkness, unhurried, intentional, covering the back street with gossamer goodbyes. No one here really knows why we are here, how grief and holiness refuse to flutter in the wind, imagining the night birds carry breaths on their tiny lips, filling up lungs, rewrite the death certificates. If I could, I would take you to the land of love and light.
Beautiful. I think that actually encapsulates how we still go on living in spite of all the deaths, in spite of all this negativity around us, in spite of the pandemic, we still cherish that ardor to live. I think that is the best part that a poet can do in this. What a poet can do during the pandemic, it's about that resurrection of life that a poet can do through his lines. So that is the best thing that a poet can do. I think this is from the next question. This is from our audience. So this is a question about translating a text or poems. So what would be your suggestions for people who want to go for translating a text or poems of same connecting themes? Interesting question.
Yeah, but for translation, I believe that you have to be very close to the original, and especially to preserve the cultural context. I mean, that is important. I mean, if I translate a Malayalam poetry in Bengali, so I have to learn those things, and especially the surrounds, the culture, the context of culture there. So those things we have to preserve. I mean, even though it is translation words may be different, and you can take, because you know that the people are telling the transcreation, you cannot just translate literally word by word. So you have to take some freedom of translating in your own language, which uh, you know better. So for translation, that is one of the important point which I believe that you have to be close to your original. And the next thing is that Dr. Sangyukta Dasgupta, she normally translates many Tagore poems and many other poems and stories and so many things. She once written somewhere that translation is always gain, and that is true. Suppose if I cannot, I don't, I have no idea of how Pablo Neruda writes. Okay, because I don't know the Spanish. So what I'll do, Neruda will be totally invisible for me unless there is a translation. I have no idea to reach there. So translation, even though it has many faults, it is always a gain, and I agree with fully with that. Any translation is always a gain. Something is there, no? Instead of nothing. If nobody translate, it's difficult. I cannot do. Nobody can do it. It's all very very. I mean, if you show hundreds of reason, you may be right, but you need translation. Translation is very very important, and whatever anybody is translating, it's a wonderful. I mean, you have to salute them that uh, for this his or her effort, we can at least have the glimpses of the original, which we otherwise, because we don't know the language, we couldn't reach there. So that way, yes, translation is always a gain for me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think our audience, they had this question, and I think she has already got her answer. So this brings us almost, we are almost nearing the end of our session. I think we have around 5 minutes left, and we had such an enriching session. So Before we end, I should not actually say, I don't feel like ending. It's like I can go on and on, but then there is a time limit
There is
that
a
we have
comment
to
I
adhere
just
to.
read. Anju
Yes.
ji, a translation should
Yes,
work in
yes.
the target language too, and that is
Absolutely.
also
Yes, yes.
absolutely
There is
correct.
one,
Yeah,
yes. She is writing a translation should work in the target language, to even
yeah,
as
yeah,
you say,
yeah,
true
yeah.
to the original. So that's again one very important point that
Important
has
point.
been
Yes,
raised.
yes,
Yes.
yes.
So
I
the
do
essence
agree
of
with.
translation that should not be lost, and also the source language and the target language, these
Mhm.
should be taken care of.
Both
Thank you
should
so
be,
much.
I mean, aligned.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, absolutely. So before we end, I just have one question, because from Litinfinite Journal, we have been targeting two types of guest sessions. One is for the creative writing portions that we have, creative writing or sessions on creative writing. Another, of course, is a part of the larger academic space that we have arranged. So before we end or come to how we started the session with, do you have any suggestion for the new Indian English writers, Indian English poets to be more precise? Do you have any
Yeah,
suggestion?
yeah, yeah. I have the only suggestion that write more and write better. Unless you are satisfied yourself, you should go on writing. It's not like that write 10 poems and that's it. And you have to rework and rework unless you are satisfied totally. And don't believe on others. You first satisfy yourself. That is more important. And poetry, I do believe that it's not a place to be comforted. I went to poetry and I feel very comfortable, I feel very peaceful there. No, it is not like that. Poetry is a place, it is not a therapeutic tool as such. You have to face the heat, you have that courage to resist, to protest. There are so many, direction where a poet can go. And so, my only suggestion to the younger people who are writing now, that you write more, read more, and if you have chance, you go for any creative writing courses. Try to learn. I mean, you don't have to be academic as such, but you can have some idea, some learning, uh, even online or offline, whichever way it can help you. You should do that. Learning is never ending, and if some mentors are there, it's always better. So I'll suggest that. And even though you are not a student of literature, but still you can write poetry. There is no harm in it. If you have that interest, if you have that passion, and if you read poets, that is also very important. Read poets. So that way, nobody can stop you if you do these things. So I'm
Yes,
hopeful about young
yes,
poets because there a lot of experimentation is now going on. A lot of hybrid poets are coming, which is also very interesting. That people are using different language in a single poem: Bengali, English, Hindi, two
right.
lines Bengali, three lines Hindi, like that. So those experiments are going on. Whether it is good or bad, that time will tell. But people are doing a lot of experiments are going on. So we have to go with that. We have to move on with this thing. And unless you experiment, unless you do something new, there is no as such progress. Now you'll be feeling very stagnant.
Absolutely. And I think you have made a very relevant point here, that we should read what others are writing, we should share, we should read. So I think that actually builds a very close connection, how we are
Yes,
seeing
yes.
others writing,
Connect
the
with each
different
other.
styles, connecting through poetry. So that is a very
Good.
essential thing that we need to know. On that note, this is for our audience. We are almost nearing the end of our session. So on that note, on that Friday note, we will just hear one or two more poems from our esteemed guest today, and we shall end the session.
Thank you, Sutani, for giving me so much of time and inviting me here.
It's a pleasure.
Uh,
It's a pleasure. I was planning for this for a long time.
One of my favorite poem I just want to read. Holy water. The water understands civilization well, R. W. Emerson. There are no stories. The evening lights, the lamp of redemption on the muddy river bank. Bathing huts are drawn in shining colors. Worshippers and devotees chanting mantras to the tune of hymn and harmony. Holding their heads up against the smoke-swept sky, the clouds and the night birds make a noting, answering God's call. Amidst the blowing of conches, the rituals and prayers continue in phases. I close my eyes and feel the eerie silence inside. Holy water wets my feet. And the last poem, which I'd like to end with: Our stories. Let us go near the Ganges, you and I, find a corner near the ghat, and talk about life, what may happen to us. We have seen earlier the speckle of fears in the eyes of shore birds, a few raindrops to settle somewhere. We wait for the separation. Even we curse the weather, gathering dry leaves and dust. It's just that we know, still weaving the words in the memory of landscapes. A final showdown come twilight, the colors turn into flame, call out our names. For us, though the life continues the same, colors blurring, earth to sky. How rare is the evening like this? How is it possible? We don't have any answer. What else can we expect? After the first layers of darkness, we have seen the light. There are always the lights of other memories. We need nothing more. Stars are threading their way and descending in a hurry on the streets of Kolkata, still holding our hands against the strong breeze. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was a lovely note with which we are going to end our session today. This is for all our audience. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. On this positive note, let us end this that even after the pandemic, it is poetry that can really sustain. It is poetry that can rekindle the vitality of life. And I extend my heartfelt thanks to our esteemed guest tonight, poet Gopal Lahiri, for giving us his time. Thank you so much, sir, for coming today.
Thank you, Sritarni, for this wonderful session. And I wish your Litinfinite Journal should go should scale heights like anything.
Thank you
And
so
wish
much.
you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very
This
much.
is for our audience. Before we go, you can grab your copy of poet Gopal Lahiri's new book. It's available on Amazon. Alleys are filled with future alphabets. Thank you so much. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good night.